right, who has had an interaction with the American healthcare system lately? Yes, okay, so maybe you went for yourself, maybe for a loved one. If you went for you, do you remember getting a survey in the mail afterwards, maybe email? It's allegedly under the guise of understanding the patient experience. Does this sound familiar? Anyone get these? Good, okay, yeah. So if you don't, or if you haven't had the great pleasure of going to an American hospital, here's some background. Many American hospitals are required to send out these surveys, which again, under the guise of understanding and improving the patient experience. They will ask you questions like, was your nurse courteous? Did your appointment start on time? Did your doctor explain your medication? And if you happen to have observed something outside the scope of the 32-question survey, you get a tiny little line at the bottom. And that's where you get to say, there were no signs in the parking garage. I could not figure out how to get to the office. That's where you get to say, there was an error in my medical file. I don't have that disease. That's where you get to say, hey, I came in because I needed a rabies vaccine. It's a life or death situation, and no one could tell me how much it cost. These surveys are required by law, and they go out to understand patient experience, allegedly. And yet, if you receive one while you're in the middle of a health crisis, how does it feel? I'll tell you how it makes me feel. It makes me feel angry. It makes me feel frustrated. It makes me feel extremely powerless against this monolithic, bought-up, multi-hospital healthcare system that no one can tell me how much a vaccine costs. It's extremely frustrating. And yet, many of us are keen to send some of these surveys ourselves. Which brings me to the topic of today's talk, which is voluntary churn, and specifically, how we investigate and address voluntary churn. So it's very easy to send out these multiple choice surveys. Anyone sending a multiple choice survey out? People cancel, you say, why'd you cancel? A couple of options. Oh my gosh, none of you? All right, well, this talk's gonna be useless. You can go have a break. We're gonna address some of the things that you can do instead anyway. So one of the challenges with how we investigate multiple choice or how we investigate churn is that we send out a multiple choice survey with a set of finite reasons for why people could have canceled. And just like that hospital survey that asks you if the nurse was nice to you is not actually asking you about this entire breadth of your patient experience, these surveys do not give you a full understanding of what is happening that causes people to cancel. Now, before we get too far into it, I want to give you a roadmap for the talk we will have today. I want to encourage you to reframe your understanding of customer research, even if you're not doing multiple choice surveys, which is great. I want to show you how you can gather a set of qualitative data instead, very similar to what Joanna also spoke about. And then finally, I want to leave you with a roadmap for how you can set up these systems for understanding and addressing what's happening with voluntary churn, even if you don't have a research team. Now, before I get too much further along, anyway, who here was here last year and heard Joanna, or heard Claire Swellentrop's talk on jobs to be done style research? Yeah, awesome. Okay, now I'm gonna be judgy. Who went home and did the homework? Who interviewed 10 customers, transcribed the interviews, extracted the insights? Okay, we have some teachers' pets, that's great. But if you didn't, I understand. I empathize with you. I likewise beat the drum of interviewing your customers, but I completely understand that going from not having a system for qualitative research, not getting that data, to implementing all of the systems can be overwhelming. And so it becomes a someday project. Someday, I will figure out who I need to interview. Someday, I will decide what questions I should ask them. Someday, I'll transcribe it and, I don't know, Google what to do with a transcription of a customer interview. And someday is the timeline for most people's research projects. Profitwell released this great benchmark study on customer research, and specifically, how few of us do it. They found that 70%, okay, so 70%, most businesses, 70% is most, do not do research. Do not talk with their customers. 70% of businesses talk with fewer than 10 customers on a monthly basis, irrespective of revenue. So we're solo founders. Maybe we're not at $50 million a year, but the businesses that get there still don't talk to their customers. Now, if you're on a someday timeline for understanding what's happening with voluntary churn, and if you have some intermediary technique, maybe your multiple choice surveys, or maybe you send out an occasional email, maybe you Google if people are bad-mouthing you on Twitter, or more likely you just have 30,000 other things on your to-do list, so how are you going to squeeze it all in? If you rely on these intermediary techniques, you will not understand why people are leaving. And why do you need to understand why people are leaving? If you don't understand why they're leaving, you can't possibly know what to address. I am an onboarding email writer. I am a conversion copywriter just like Joanna, but I am here to tell you that onboarding emails or copy of any kind may not be the solution if you have other things going on that are causing churn. So if you don't know why something is happening, you can't adopt the tool of the quantifier. You need to be an investigator. If you're an investigator, or if you're a quantifier, that means asking these multiple choice surveys. When you send one of these out, and I know no one admitted it to sending them out, but we'll pause and talk about them anyway. If you send a multiple choice survey out with a set of finite reasons for why people could have canceled, and if you do this at any stage of your business, whether you're asking them why they signed up, what brought them here today, if you're sending out a multiple choice survey with a set of finite answers, you create two problems in your business. The first is false confidence, and the second is working on things that won't help the problem. So to illustrate the problem of false confidence, I'd invite you to think back of the first person who broke your young heart. And after they ended things, did you write a survey and pass it across the table at study hall, asking them the reason why? Of course not. This would be a completely ludicrous way of understanding why a relationship between two people has ended. Here's how it builds false confidence. You could send this survey to 3 of your old significant others, and they could all tell you, it's not you, it's me. And you might think that's real useful data, but the real answer for why people ended it with you wasn't even there. So you may walk away thinking you have an understanding of why people are ending things with you. Maybe you're going through a new partner every other month sophomore year. But in reality, you have some work that you need to do on yourself. We know these surveys are weird and ludicrous. Nobody sends them. And yet we're more than happy to send them in a setting where we have a business relationship. The same situation applies. If you ask people why they have canceled and you give them an option to choose between price for not enough time or they're not using it, they may all tell you that they're canceling because of price, but what do you do with that information? Do you lower your price? Raise your price? How do you make sense of this without any additional context? So you build this false confidence when you send these surveys or when you send any kind of quantifying methodology or research methodology before you do your investigation. The second problem that stems from this false confidence is that you work on things that don't matter. People are canceling because you have problems that you may not be addressing. And like I said, copywriting might not fix it if you've got some bug problems. On the flip side, maybe you're just really good. Maybe you're so good that people graduate out of your product and they no longer need you. If you sell recipes, maybe you teach people how to cook, they come to you hangry, and then you teach them to boil water, to fry an egg, and then after 6 months, they're hosting their friends over for 13-course meals every other weekend. They don't need you anymore. If this is what's going on, having some kind of new email funnel, even having some new feature may not be the factor that's going to address why people are leaving. Okay, so if having a survey, if asking people a set of finite questions about what their main reason for canceling is the tool of the quantifier and it is not going to work, then what's the tool of the investigator? Just like Joanna said, it's the open-ended question. You can send it when people sign up. What's going on in your world that brought you here? And why did you cancel? Now, an open-ended question, no one hassled Joanna about it, but I know some of you are thinking, That's anecdotal. That is open-ended. That's just one or two people's opinion. And besides, we have to look at their behavioral data. We can't look at the words our customers say. If I had asked them what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, right? We know this narrative that we can't be listening to our customers, but your customers know exactly why they canceled. And they will tell you, and you can ask them. When you ask this question, you generate voice of customer data. Before Joanna's talk today, or before this one, who heard this term? Oh boy, okay. Voice of customer data is a term I use every day, and I was so confident that everyone else would know it that I almost put it in the title until Rob talked me out of it. So I want to explain what this voice of customer data is, why it's so powerful, why it's so meaningful, why it's so impactful for understanding why people are leaving, how you can use what they tell you to address the problems that are causing churn. Then I'm going to show you how to manipulate this qualitative data, because I know you all have very long to-do lists and you're not going to want to walk away from here. Everyone is a teacher's pet who will just do the work without giving you a system. So what is voice of customer data? It is the raw, it is the unedited, it is the non-summarized, expletive-laden, grammatically incorrect, exact words your customers use to describe their problem. Just like Joanna said, those words that like confidence that can appear when you have multiple conversations with people, they're living in your support. This data is living in your support chats. It's living in your Twitter feeds. It's living in your emails that you have with people and in your sales conversation. It's everywhere. So I want to talk about how you can make this voice of customer data work for you. You need to collect it, you need to organize it, and you need to share it. And when you do this for your entire business, and you may have a voice of customer program, you'll be able to address more problems. But for starters, how do you address it for churn? You can start with your open-ended question of asking, why did you cancel? To show you why this is so important, I want to share an example from my own work. There's a great SaaS product that had a very high cancellation rate. People who stayed were happy, but people who left were unhappy. So we sent out a survey that said, why did you cancel? We gave 6 different reasons. And in the meantime, we sent an email from the founder in plain text, creating a conversation, asking, why did you cancel? And we found 29 completely unique reasons for why people were canceling that had absolutely no parallel to the reasons we asked them about. We said, is price a factor? They said, I can't find this feature. We said, is the amount of content something that's influencing your decision? They said, I'm scared what people will think of me if I use this product. If you do not ask your customers why, 29 reasons there for the visual learners. If you do not ask your customers why, you will not understand how you can address churn. So if multiple choice surveys, if sending a set of finite reasons for why people have canceled can give you a sense of false confidence and lead you to work on the wrong things, if asking your customers why they have done something can allow you to work on the right things and give you some actionable data, how do you start to make sense of it as a bootstrapper, as a solo founder, as a member of a small team, someone who doesn't have the kind of 50-person research staff or research operational team that a Fortune 500 company might have? I like to start by grouping the reasons that come in into different categories of problems. I want to know, is this an us problem? Do we have a problem with our product? Are people telling us that there's broken things we need to fix? Is it a them problem? Is there something happening on the other side of the screen that has nothing to do with us? Or is it some kind of misconnection? We could help you, but you haven't figured out how, and we haven't made it easy for you. What are some examples? I have seen people say that they cancel because there are bugs, big reason, crashes. I recently started using a video software, and the time markers were very difficult to use, so I stopped using it. It was easier for me to record, export, download, edit, re-upload than it was for me to deal with these 2 tiny little time markers. So I canceled. You could have a problem that's happening on your customer side. My boss said no. A lot of these are code for something else. I have no time. I'm not using it. I'm not seeing the value. This could be a number of different things. There could be a number of different things hiding underneath of what's happening here. And then finally, there's missed value problems. And these are where you can start to see these are some of your lowest hanging fruit, because your customers are coming to you with a specific problem that your product solves, but they haven't been able to make that connection. So when you ask people why they have canceled, you can get all of the responses that come in and group them into your product problems, your customer-centric problems, and your missed value problems. From there, you can start to get a little bit more nuanced. That's when you can say, all right, should we, instead of thinking about whether or not we should build this new feature, ship this new email sequence, you can say 30% of people have told us this one thing is really bad and really frustrating. When you get really advanced, you can say 30% of people who are on our highest price plan complained about this specific thing. 100% of people who are working on lower price plans complained about something else. So how do you investigate, how do you operationalize this process? There's 2 buttons on here, and I keep pressing the wrong one. So there are 3 things that you can do to make this easy so that you don't have to obliterate your to-do list. First, you can set up an email. It goes out every time somebody cancels, and the responses come to you. Now, the next step is extremely important. You must extract all of the responses, all of that qualitative voice of customer data that comes in, and take it outside of your inbox, outside of your type form, wherever you're collecting it, and put it someplace where you can manipulate it. And then finally is where you can, once you have it out, then you can start moving it around. So here's the email that I want you to send. Anytime somebody cancels, I want you to send them an email from you or someone else high up with high status in your organization, maybe somebody that canceling customers are likely to have chatted with. I want you to thank them for their business, and I want you to say, why did you cancel? Please respond to me and tell me. In this situation, the call to action is not go to a type form. It is not go fill out this 1-question survey. It's respond to me. I am one human who had a relationship with you. Now we do not. Please talk to me. And I have found very high success rates sending this email. People really do respond. After you send it, what can you do with the responses that you receive? When you begin setting up your Voice of Customer program, when you begin looking into the reasons people provide you for why they have canceled, you're not going to have a lot. Maybe you get 50 people, maybe you get 100, and you can have a great starter Voice of Customer program where you look at the reasons for why people have done something. And it can all live in a Google Doc or a spreadsheet or an Airtable. Then you can start saying, all right, as these responses come in more and more, we can push them out in a designated Slack channel so everyone in the company sees exactly what's happening when people are canceling. And then finally, when you start getting really good at organizing Voice of Customer data, I strongly recommend investing in a research aggregation tool. This is a relatively new product category. I love Enjoy HQ, full disclosure. I have a phenomenal working relationship with this company. I get no money out of telling you how amazing they are. When you're able to advance your Voice of Customer program, when you're able to formalize how you treat that qualitative data that you're collecting to the same extent that you quantify all of your behavioral metrics, you're able to make more impactful, more meaningful, more customer-driven decisions. And having all of your Voice of Customer data, not just the responses people give you, but everything people say in Intercom or Zendesk, everything that people say about you on Twitter, every time you have an interview with a customer and you transcribe it, where do you put this information? How do you deal with it? How do you make sure everyone has it? You can put it in a tool that everyone can have access to. But maybe you're not there yet. And if you're not, I would strongly encourage you to have a hallway conversation with Jordan, Jordan of CartHook. The CartHook team is doing a pretty neat proto Voice of Customer program. Once a week, the customer-facing team reviews the exact words, not the summaries, the exact words that customers use to describe what's going on in their world. and they share this information with the non-customer facing teams. They call it a WOCUS. Has anyone heard of WOCUS? This is an idea that comes out of Amazon. And when you start having programs like this, you're able to say, okay, our team, like Jordan's, was 4 people. Now it's 18 people. Not everyone is talking to customers. Not everyone understands what might be the reasons for why people cancel or why we might want to choose to fix one problem versus another problem. Okay, so I told you earlier that I fully recognize that your anecdotal voice of customer data may cause some of you to bristle a little bit. After you have collected it, then you can quantify it. So if you come in trying to investigate churn by saying, I don't know, I guess it's these reasons, or I heard a couple of people saying this is why they canceled, or this guy dragged us on Twitter for this problem that we need to address. If you start to get a significant volume of qualitative, exact phrasing, exact pain points that your customers use, you can say this is where we're facing the biggest problems. Maybe one feature is bad, maybe multiple features are causing some situations. That story I shared with you earlier, where we sent an email and 29 different reasons for cancellation came back, we found that many of the responses had 2 reasons. People canceled because there was more than one thing they hated about it. A not insignificant group also had as many as 4 reasons. So when you allow your customers to have more than one reason for why they're canceling, you can start to quantify all of these different reasons across the spectrum of your whole base. I will say that I agree with you. Quantifying your reasons for churn is extremely important, but most people either do not choose to investigate it or choose to investigate it too early. Okay, so if investigating a problem with the tool of the quantifier, with a set of finite options that you force people to select because you think it might be the reasons for why they're doing something, if that has its shortcomings, and if the qualitative data you should be collecting instead is the exact words people have, that reason for why they're canceling, and if you have these systems set up so you're always collecting it, you can set it up in an afternoon and you're just always collecting this data so you don't have to be constantly wondering and worrying about who you're going to interview and when. It's just there doing it and you can pop in and monitor as you like. Then what happens for your business? The first thing is that you can work on things that are actually broken. If people are canceling your product and then you ask them why, and they tell you they have not had enough time to use it, what does that mean? But if you ask them why and they tell you this particular part of the user interface was just a nightmare and I couldn't navigate it and my computer sits over here and I'm over here because I'm using it with something in between us, then you can say, all right, well, there is more to this problem than we understood. Just like Joanna said, Joanna's amazing talk, Joanna's understanding of voice of customer data has greatly influenced mine. She's taught me a lot of what I know. Her way of saying you need to look at what's going on in your customer's world applies to investigating other problems outside of sales. And when you do this, Sahil from Gumroad has generously shared this story on Twitter. You may need to have a better onboarding flow. You may have onboarding emails that really confuse your customers and make it really tricky for them to get started. But that may not be the highest priority area for you to spend your time. And if you instead choose to investigate why things might be happening, fix some actual problems, then you can start to see more meaningful results. So, with this, I leave you to please go ask your customers open-ended questions. I know I completely empathize with how difficult it can be to set up a qualitative data program, which is why I strongly encourage you to build in some of these systems so you're automating how you collect this data and where it goes and what you do with it and who can see it. And then you'll be able to start working on some of the things that are truly addressing churn. So go find out why. Thank you.
What do you think about forcing your customers to give you qualitative feedback? Like, we're not going to allow you to cancel until you tell us what to do. Or if you want to keep like your trial name and everything while you still decide, you need to tell us, why you're not continuing right now.
What do you think about your forcing your customers to give you feedback?
I have mixed feelings.
I mean, I would not force anyone to do anything as just kind of a matter of principle. I would not do that. You can set up the systems inside the cancellation process, so you can say one more thing before you go. I like sending an email because you're having a conversation. I got an email. Anytime I send an email to someone who has a CEO or someone very high status and they respond to me, it just makes my day. So that's why I like that method. But yes, you can absolutely use the embedded typeform method that Joanna suggested for asking why people signed up.
Hi, great talk, Ellie.
Thanks.
We've had like 4 or 5 different variations of some. Oh, sorry. Some open-ended question about why did you cancel? And maybe it's just inherent in our product, but I still always get back no longer needed. That's like the number one thing. And so I'm guessing we need, I was planning to do some like exit interviews. So when you're, even with open-ended questions, you're still not getting the level of data you need. What's the next step, and what would you recommend in that case?
That is a great question. I know some of the talks tomorrow are going to dig into the methodology that you could have or the methodology for conducting interviews. What I would suggest is if you were having a conversation and people are people truly responding with 3 words, like no longer needed, or are they giving you a complete sentence or like maybe a little more?
A little bit of both. Yeah, a little bit of both.
Okay.
Some people are lazy and they'll just say no longer needed. Some a little bit more.
Okay.
We'll get too expensive, which again, it's like, are we not providing enough value, or do you actually not have the money? And so we just don't get that like extra level that we need for it to be actionable.
Yeah. So the cool thing about having the first point of investigation be an email conversation is that someone who responds to you is much more likely to respond to your question to say, thank you for sharing this piece of information. Your feedback's really important, and if you are open to it, I would love to schedule some time at your convenience to talk a little bit more about your experience. I have found that people who are canceling have very strong opinions they're very keen to share. And this is a very, someone's already told you they have an interest, and this is a good way to get a little bit more.
Thanks, Ali. On that note, I was wondering, so we did send out an email and like a personal email asking, it was when people subscribed, asking like, hey, what are you planning on like, what's your biggest problem that you're trying to solve with our tools, right? And I got back, I don't know, like good couple of emails. Spend the next 3-4 days answering to all those emails.
Yes.
And so it's one of those things where you can do that once and set up as a campaign. How do you feel about sending out these personal emails, but then like not actually being able to answer personally?
This is a great point that was in the original manuscript, and I skipped right over around slide 4. So when you are first starting off this process, it's relatively manageable if you do not have a high volume of people canceling. Of course, you will get to a point where you have a lot. Now, there's 2 approaches that you can take. One is if you're getting lots of people who are canceling, you could choose to respond to some people. You could choose to change the language so you're not guaranteeing a response. If you have another person on your team who can respond to those emails on your behalf, it's not ideal, but it's very common practice, then that can be another way to address the volume of intake. I will say the first time that if a CEO is not accustomed to sending out emails to the customer, the first time you get an influx, it's going to take up your whole week.
In the B2B space, where there could be several users on an account, and the person who actually clicks the cancel button might not be the person who's making the decision, that might have the credit card, whatever. How do you choose how you're going to survey that company to find out why they're canceling?
That is such a great question. When you have all these different decision makers, and some are champions, and I like to call some of the others maybe even antagonists, how do you decide? I think it kind of depends. which is less of a non-answer than it sounds like, there are a few different ways that you could approach it. You could start by saying, all right, the person who had their name on the credit card and they canceled, maybe they are not the main person using it, but they may have the most information about why. You could start there. You could also look at people's behavior, who was logging in a lot and then all of a sudden stopped. It's a little bit less automated here, and there's a little, if your email stack is so advanced that you can have all these different filters and set them up in such a way, then cool. I would start by making this kind of a manual process if you have teams, because there's a lot more dynamics that go into it. Yeah.
Hi, Allie.
Hi.
Thank you again. So in a world where we were thinking we had 6 reasons and we actually had 29,
Yeah.
How do we think about prioritizing, what's possible and where to start, especially when we have limited resources?
Great question. Hannah's going to give a really deep dive talk on prioritization tomorrow. No pressure, Hannah. What I find is that the first time you do this, it's immediately obvious. The very first time you do it, many people will have the same problem, and it's likely something that you're already aware of somewhere. So that's the first thing that I like to look at. The other things I like to consider are whether or not this is someone who is who's a typical kind of customer for us. Is this someone who is likely to, do they fit the profile of who we think we are serving? Are they on a high-paying plan? Were they on a $5 a month plan? Hopefully not. That's not one you have. And then starting to see where those problems can be the most impactful.
Hey, Allie.
Hey.
Is this how much of this would you say would also apply to someone who does not have like a SaaS business, is not dealing with churn? It's all one-time sales kind of thing, and someone who maybe wants a refund or something like that.
Is that your business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not hypothetical. That's me.
Yeah. Are you getting a lot of refund
I'm the
requests?
only non-SaaS guy. It feels like sometimes.
Do you get a lot of refund requests? Is this like a
no,
big
very
problem?
very few. But when they come in, I guess like sometimes the challenge of maybe not so much a refund all the time, but it's like a blocker to why they're not buying, and to try and get them to go over that point.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so another implication for having some of these automations set up where you're asking questions and gathering this data is being able to ask people who did buy what was going on in your world that led you to my product today, and also being able to send out emails that say, hey, was there something you were hoping to get that you did not get? That's what I would recommend there. There's a little bit more to it, but we can talk about that later. Great.
Run, Rob, run.
Thank you so much for a great talk.
Oh, thank you.
I was wondering whether there's an opportunity here to be gathering this kind of information before the patient has died. Where if you do have a support function, right, or slash customer success, what have you, being able to, is there a way to be trying to gather this data from people who are at a point of distress but not yet cancellation, or is that data going to be as valuable as Clear relative to like just the post-mortem analysis we're doing now?
Yeah. Okay, so the more time that you have to spend, the more staff that you have to investigate this, the better, because there are ways to investigate almost any question. For this one in particular, when you have a research aggregation tool, you can look at, for example, what are the support tickets that people had a week before they canceled? What was the thing they were trying to ask us about, and then we didn't hear from them again, or they canceled their payment? That's where I would start.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more. Any other questions?
Sorry, one more. I find this very fascinating. So what if you have this set up, you get this data regularly. You don't have somebody who's dedicated to doing this in the company. And this is definitely something that happens with us. It's like, yeah, we have those surveys go out somewhere. I guess we're using Hotjar or something. But and then it just lives there.
Yeah.
So how would you go about a system where you actually Like, would you put somebody in charge of that? Are you like suggesting to look at it on a regular basis? Like, how would you go about systematizing the actual looking at the data, not just the collecting, because that's the easy part?
Yes, the collection is the easy part. There are a few different things that I have seen work really well. One is to have one designated time, even if it's 15 minutes a week, where, like in Jordan's example, where people are discussing that data actively. Another is to have digests that go out. So anytime you get a significant volume of data, maybe it's at the end of every month, you can push that out to everyone in your team. Those are the most basic things. The more people who are involved and need to be looking at it, the more that I would encourage people to be have access to wherever the data is stored instead of some kind of reminder system to have people go in and look at it. Because reviewing data is a very cognitively easy task. You get your reminder, you go and you look at it. So very often having that tiny little thing can be the difference.
Thank you very much, Ali.
Thanks, everyone.